This video focuses on the diplomatic responsibilities and powers of the president. Like diplomacy means like dealing with foreign countries. And a lot of this is not really the president necessarily doing this himself, but people or groups that work on behalf of the president. So again, this is another one of those things where there's a formal presidential power that deals with this and an informal presidential power. So presidents and people that work on behalf of the president can basically create a treaty with a foreign country. A treaty is a formal agreement between the United States and another nation to do something. And as per the rules in the Constitution, any kind of treaty that's made between the United States and a foreign country needs to get approval from the Senate. It requires a two-thirds vote to basically approve for the treaty to go into effect. So, for example, an example of a treaty would be the Paris Peace Treaty, which basically ends World War II, right? So, this would be an example of a formal treaty that was made between the United States. The president was probably involved, people that work for the president involved in making this treaty, but it required approval from the United States Senate for it to actually take effect. There is also an informal presidential diplomatic power that has come into being. It's called an executive agreement. This is basically kind of like a treaty, except you're calling it something different, so it doesn't require any kind of Senate approval. Much like executive orders and signing statements, which we talked about previously, this is another informal power that has dramatically expanded the role and the power of the president. So, if it's maybe controversial or you don't have the votes in the Senate, you don't necessarily call it a treaty, you call it an executive agreement. And because it's not an official treaty and it's more of an informal executive agreement, you don't actually have to go through the Senate approval process. An example of this would be the Paris Climate Accords. In 2016, President Obama entered the United States into a global climate agreement by which we pledge to cut back our carbon emissions and put harsher standards on businesses to make sure that they were more environmentally friendly as well. Um, President Obama wasn't sure the votes were there in the Senate to label this an official treaty. So instead, this was deemed to be an executive agreement. Obviously, frustrating the Senate because they're kind of cut out of the process. Once Trump was elected, he pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords, primarily because he felt like our major competitor, China, they were not abiding by the same rules, and this would essentially put American businesses at a disadvantage. So he pulled us out. And then when Biden was elected on his first day in office, he put us back into the Paris climate agreements with other nations, again, in the form of an executive agreement. So the important note is a treaty, because it's a formal presidential power, requires two-thirds approval. An executive agreement, because it's an informal presidential power, does not. And again, that's what frustrates Congress, is they feel like the president is sort of getting around the rules that are stated in the Constitution.